Welcome. Glad to have you along for 15 minutes. I'm Brian Solito with the Greater Columbus Chamber of Commerce, and I'm joined by the 70th Mayor of Columbus, Georgia, Skip Henderson. Mayor, thanks for sharing 15 minutes with us.
Hey, my pleasure, Brian. Thank you.
Well, on March the 20th, you issued a declaration of local emergency for the city of Columbus that you have subsequently extended now until the end of April. We'll talk about in just a second about this kind of reopening that Governor Kemp, soft reopening that he's talking about. But first, maybe you could catch us up to speed on confirmed cases of COVID-19 and also, unfortunately, deaths related to it as it relates to Columbus and Muskogee County.
Yeah, well, actually, as of today, as of the 22nd of April, DPH has confirmed 237 positive cases in Columbus. And that continues a little uptick. The thing that we are grateful for is that it has not been spiking. It has been a very, very gradual, very slow move. And it has not seemed to have impacted our hospitalization rate. So the absorption rate from the hospitals is still very, very stable. We're very pleased to see that, because that's the entire focus of flattening the curve, is to make sure that the surge, if it does hit your local hospitals, that it is not overwhelming. You know, we are, and probably the saddest part about this is we've had 4 residents of Muskogee County who have lost their lives to this virus. And you know, everything our office has been about over the last several weeks is how do we try to do our best to encourage the citizens to help us in protecting the folks that live in this community. And I have to, number one, say how we are praying for those who are currently battling the virus. We pray for support for the families that have lost loved ones. And we also want to thank the citizens, because the people that live in this community have really, for the most part, they've really come through. And the weapon to combat the spread of this virus is us. And fortunately, this is Columbus, Georgia, where we typically rally together and do big things.
Well, I know that I was trying to think back the last time that you and I were actually in the same room together, and I think it was sometime in February. You and your team and your command staff at the city were really on the front leading edge of all of this. What were some of your early indications that you kind of saw this coming and knew that you were going to have to act with some swiftness?
Well, I don't know. I'm certainly no smarter than the next guy. My crystal ball is no more clear than anybody else's, but I think we just took it seriously. In February, we stood up the Mayor's Medical Response Team, which is comprised of a number of key players in any kind of effort to battle a pandemic. People from the hospitals, from the school district, our public safety, our first responders from the fire and EMS side, the city manager's office, Fort Benning, Department of Public Health. So we got all of those folks together and we listened to what they told us. And I'm the kind of guy that, I don't go to the doctor unless there's a bone sticking out. But your perspective changes when you realize that you are responsible for doing everything you can to create a safe environment for 200,000 people. So we were one of the early ones, early cities to get on board with putting some restrictions in. And, thanks to the way that the public responded, I think it has absolutely helped us keep our numbers a little bit lower than some other communities.
You had a kind of a personal, I would call it a scare, where you had to self-quarantine yourself after you thought you may have come in contact. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, I didn't say who at the time, but it was my sister. She was hospitalized. And because some of the symptoms were very similar to COVID-19, they did a test. Well, I'd seen her just the week prior. So it's kind of hard to talk the talk if I wasn't going to walk the walk. And so I quarantined, worked from a bedroom downstairs in the house. And fortunately, she tested negative, and I was able to go back to work. And by the way, happiest person in Columbus was my wife to get me back out of the house.
Well, as I told you earlier, we're trying not to get in each other's way here at home as well. What week is this? Week 5, week 6? I've lost. What day of the week is this? I lost track.
I know. Yeah, we go through that exercise every morning. Our daughter is actually kind of quarantining with us. She got here from Atlanta a month or so ago. And of course, it really has been a delight. We're fortunate that we are a very close family and enjoy each other's company. But you bring up something kind of interesting, and that is what our world is going to look like as we begin to ease out from this shelter in place. And I think it's going to look very different. I think it's going to be certainly until there's some type of vaccine that is created. Because we're just going to have to continue to socially distance ourselves from one another, and that's not easy for me. I'm a hugger, and I like shaking people's hands and slapping them on the back. And there's going to be new protocol, and I can anticipate seeing some real fashion statements made with masks or nose and mouth covering. So it's going to be different.
Well, certainly. And somebody said the other day that instead of social distancing, we should call it physical distancing, because we're finding new ways to be social, aren't we?
Absolutely. And, I think too, if there is a silver lining to this incredible challenge that our planet is going through, is that we are learning to do things in different and unique ways. And we're learning that as long as the people that are involved care and are focused on accomplishing something, it almost doesn't matter whether you're in the same room or whether you're Zooming back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned a good segue, the soft reentry. Governor Kemp has really, he's on the forefront. I know there's some other states that are talking about some sort of soft reopening, but that's going to happen on Friday, unless something changes between now and then. And it's going to affect a certain amount of businesses, certain industry types, but also with about 20 different points that they have to adhere to. And I want to hear your thoughts on, too soon, just right, maybe too early? I don't know. You tell me.
Well, it's kind of hard. It goes back to that crystal ball thing. Nobody knows. I mean, the key is, I think, using as much data as you can acquire. And what I'll say is, I understand why Governor Kemp is doing what he's doing. He wants the same thing that every single Georgian wants, and every single Columbusite wants. And that is, wants people to be safe and open the economy, get people back to work so their families aren't nervous about when their next paycheck is coming. So I get that. Having said that, I do have some concerns. I think that based on the criteria and the data that I've seen, we are a little early, at least from a perspective of my comfort zone. And the other part that I think concerns us is, I would have liked to have seen a little more local flexibility, so that if there was a gating and everybody in Georgia was allowed to begin to look at phase one, implementing phase one, that the local governments would be able to say under what conditions certain industries and certain businesses can open. But I think our message will not change. Our message from the mayor's office will be to urge people to continue on the path that they're on, continue to shelter in place, or at least stay close to home. Don't venture out unless you absolutely have to. And if you do go out, use a mask and practice that physical distancing. So we're not going to change our message. I think it has served Columbus well, and I think that it will continue to serve us well.
Well, I think you're right on. And I think people are going to make wise decisions on, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
That's right.
Fortunately, I can cut my own hair in the bathroom, but there are people who are gifted with hair like you that need to go out, right? And
right.
They're eager to go out. And
yeah. And I think the important thing to remember, that even under the governor's kind of restarting some of these businesses, and keep in mind, it's a fairly narrow group of businesses that had originally been actually shuttered and closed by the governor's first order. But the 20 conditions that you mentioned have been one of the addendas in non-essential businesses to be able to function, and they do include some pretty strict disinfecting requirements, social distancing your customers, and wearing PPE. They're supposed to wear a mask. So if you go to get your hairstyle, or you go to get a new piece of body art, or if you decide you want to go bowling, you need to remember that the folks that are in there should be respecting your attempt to stay healthy by keeping a mask on.
It's funny you mentioned bowling. That's one of. I mean, hey, I like bowling just as much as the next guy, but you bowl a 300 game and nobody's around, or you want to high five somebody.
That's right. Yeah, if a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear it, right? So, but you know, I will mention to you too. That's one of the things that I was a little concerned about too. Is I think as we phase into this, the more we can wait on some of the larger venues that typically draw larger crowds, I think that makes sense as well. So we're just going to continue to urge our citizens to be smart and continue the fight as they have been bringing it for the last several weeks.
I know you mentioned you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think the next 2 weeks is going to look like if you had to project it?
You know, I don't know. If I had to guess based simply on the eager compliance of our citizens, I would think it's going to be a very slow ramp up. I think that some restaurants I'm hearing from are not even going to begin to offer dine-in service just yet. They believe it's too soon. I think it's going to be a slow release, and which as it should be. I think that people are still a little nervous. I mean, they understand that you're not just protecting your health or your neighbors, but it's also your loved ones. It's your family members. I mean, I've got an 88-year-old dad that is great incentive for me to be able to make sure that I come to the office. There's nobody on the 6th floor except for Richard Bishop and I, and me. And we, so when I go home, I go straight home. I don't go anywhere else. Mm-hmm. And that way I can go visit my dad every day and make him feel like he's not so shut off from entertainment. Sure.
I'm sure you're a good source of cheering him up and kind of telling him what's going on, you know.
I don't know
to hear it straight from you.
Yeah, I don't know about the cheering up part, but it's always good to spend time with my dad. I can tell you that.
Absolutely. So you know, when you look at FEMA has numbers that say anywhere between 40 and 60% of small businesses after a natural disaster don't return. This is akin to a natural disaster, and I'm sure that the less sophisticated, if you will, businesses, the mom and pops, the ones that are kind of working week to week. I mean, they're very vulnerable in a situation like this, and I know you're concerned about that.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, we've got a lot of businesses in this community, and there's a lot of some of the ethnic grocery stores and restaurants that some of those folks don't have a clue or would never think about going and ask for a loan from the SBA. So, we need to keep an eye on those businesses to try to do everything we can in supporting them to help them remain viable so that they can keep their livelihood going.
Well, I'll get you out of here on this one. So you wake up every day, hopefully after somewhat of a peaceful rest. I know you got a lot to think about, a lot on your shoulders. What do you look at every day? Who are you talking with? What's important for you? Obviously, it's not information overload because we can all get stressed out by watching the news a lot. But what would you recommend? What are you doing?
I try to separate a little time out from my family every morning. A lot of times in the afternoon when I get home, it's kind of late, and I'm probably not great company. But my wife and I get up every morning, have a cup of coffee, just spend a little time together. Our daughter will come up. Our grand dog is staying with us. So my daughter and I will take the dogs for about a mile and a half walk every morning. And we see the sun come up as we do that. And then when I get into the office, I make sure I focus on communicating with people who are a lot wiser than me in specific areas. Our city manager, Isaiah Hughley, is an invaluable asset to the people of this community. They just have no idea. Richard Bishop, I cannot imagine doing his job, period, but certainly not under these trying times if it weren't for Richard. Becca and Alexis are working from home, but man, I'm telling you, they're on it. They're taking the calls. So it really does take a very dedicated team, not just in my office, but throughout the city government, because we're still providing the essential services. Our first responders are out there. They put their lives on the line anyway. But under these conditions, they never know what kind of an environment they're walking into. So, I just could not be more proud of my hometown, and I could not be prouder of the people that work for the Columbus Consolidated Government.
Well, on behalf of the Chamber and all of our members, we certainly thank you and your team and all of the employees, the dedicated employees at the CCG. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have now, Mayor. But we want to thank you again for being with us, and thank you for watching. And we hope to have you with us again for another 15 minutes.